Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our panel, The Future of 5G Mobility and Rapid Innovation in the DoD. So we'll go ahead and get started by introducing our panel. We'll start with Ms. Stephanie Hutch. She is the founder and president of Pki LLC, which is a native Hawaiian-owned 8A firm that is headquartered in Massachusetts. Pki specializes in Department of Defense weapons systems, integration, and wireless and wired network modernization. Pki is the owner and operator of the Gemini 5G Lab, a vendor-agnostic 5G test and evaluation facility located next to Hanscom Air Force Base at the UMass Lowell Research Institute's North Star campus. The Gemini Lab utilizes 5G open spectrum citizens broadband radio service and specializes in practical 5G technology applications through testbed analysis and business innovation. I feel like I'm breathing into this, funny. That's one of the downsides. The Gemini Lab team is collaborating with the United States Air Force, Army, Special Forces customers to develop 5G architectures to address various national security communication and data transmission challenges, which we'll be talking about on our panel today. Stephanie is also the founder and chairwoman. Oh, hey. Speaking of innovations. All right, thank you so much. Stephanie is also the founder and chairwoman of the board for the Keikoa Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to support and advance the overall welfare and economic condition of Native Hawaiians in the state of Hawaii through educational, business, and community programs. Stephanie Hutch. Moving on to Dr. Danny Sava. Dr. Danny Sava served in the United States Marine Corps, has 10 years of combat experience, and over 22 years of experience in architecting, engineering, implementing, testing, and delivering information technology solutions supporting the Department of Defense. Dr. Sava has 4 degrees, including a Doctor of Philosophy and Information Technology with a specialization in project management. He's also earned and maintained over 30 certifications in IT, security, business processes, supply chain management. In addition to his professional experience in training, he's been published several times in peer-reviewed journals and magazines. Dr. Sava's current role is Division Vice President, Deputy General Manager, and Director of Operations and Maintenance. Just a couple titles. He was crucial in writing the proposal and standing up the brand new North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, Integrated Tactical Warning Attack Assessment and Space Support Contract 2, or NISC-2 for short. Dr. Sava employs a culture of caring to control the direction of his team to ensure skills remain relevant and mentors transform others to help them become competent in emerging fields as technology advances into the future. Prior to supporting NORAD, Dr. Sava served as Director of IT Planning, Engineering, and Innovation with the United States Special Operations Command, supporting the Enterprise Operations and Maintenance Contract. Dr. Sava. Moving on, we'll go to CT, Chris C.T. Thomas. He is a leading IT strategist and systems architect for communications, cybersecurity, IoT, cloud, and digital transformation programs. Having over 15 years of experience in the IT industry, with 7 years focused on large enterprise networks, he has been consistently recognized for his leadership and innovation in IT transformation programs that deliver breakthrough enterprise and business results. Before joining Dell Technologies, CT spent nearly a decade as a results-driven information and communications technologist with extensive experience in the engineering, design, and support of creating information and communication systems for Ruckus and CommScope. In this capacity, he serves as a trusted advisor to a multitude of clients throughout the government. His specialty is in helping organizations utilize and implement modular-based open systems engineering to reduce TCO. He has an active IEE membership, as well as being a member of the IEE Communications Society, Technology and Engineering Management Society, and Systems Council, CT. Next, we'll go to Kevin Surell. Since 2016, Kevin Surell has worked to advance application of cellular communications to address the critical Navy requirements. Kevin has worked as an engineer for wireless enterprise peer connectivity architecture, commercial cellular as a transport, and 4G long-term evolution rapid prototyping projects. Since 2020, he has served as a technical lead for 5G-enabled smart warehouse pilot at Naval Base Coronado. In that role, he has overall technical lead responsibilities for the assessment, integration, risk management framework, tests and evaluation, and planning for sustainment and transition for the $100 million 3-year Naval 5G-enabled smart warehouse activity. Mr. Surell. So with the growing need to ensure that our warfighters have access to rapid communications and networks to support them, the evolution and implementation of 5G is a hot topic, and our panelists are here today to share their insights on how we can best employ this technology to remain competitive against our adversaries. So we'll start our panel today with a question for Stephanie Hutch. What is 5G and why should the DoD care?
Thank you, Casey. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So I thought we could start, at the very basic level. What is 5G? We've had a lot of discussions at this conference about that. I want to acknowledge also, I'm really proud of the diversity of this panel. I think that's a really great effort by everyone putting this together. But 5G, basically, it's the 5th generation of a cellular networking technology. So it's the evolution of the ability to move data at higher speeds and in larger quantities. And so you hear the term 5G being used to talk not only about the network, but also the devices that help facilitate that movement of data across the networks. So that can include anything from sensors to data processors, radios, antennas, and even AI algorithms that help to sort the data and analyze it once it is collected. And to the second part of Casey's question, why does DoD care? I think it comes down to the fact that we're in a very serious business. This is a life or death business that we all support. And that's something that, we need to take very seriously. Within the DoD and national security community as a whole, we really tend to prioritize the ability to empower our decision makers with as near to real-time data from trusted data sources so that they're empowered to make the best command decisions. We have entities currently who are actively committed to disrupting our ability to collect, transport, store, secure, analyze all of the data that we have. And so from a national security perspective, by leaning into 5G and technologies adjacent to that, like data management methodologies of cloud storage, cybersecurity, DevSecOps, AI, ML, we're able to keep fighting for that strategic advantage to enhance our situational awareness and strengthen our C2.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to pass it over to Kevin Surell to give an add-on to that question about what is 5G and why should the DoD care and some of his use cases.
Great. Good afternoon, Casey, and I appreciate the intro. So as you stated, I'm the technical lead for the 5G Smart Warehouse, and what we're looking at doing is modernizing that warehouse through a variety of technologies, whether it be AR, VR, autonomous mobile robots, IoT sensors, and all those devices are very throughput intensive. They require high data rates, low latency, and so the 5G features that we're looking at in the short term includes the wider bandwidth that's available with 5G, especially with millimeter wave. There's almost 100 times more spectrum available in 5G compared to 4G LTE. So we're hoping to leverage that capability. Along the same lines, 5G allows for a dynamic frame structure, which improves the spectral efficiency of the communication channel and also will allow for a lower latency, which is important for AR, VR type capabilities. And then lastly, 5G offers improved user authentication. The cybersecurity capabilities of 5G we're hoping to leverage to improve the security and authentication of our devices. That is an improvement over LTE and 3G.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. And I'm going to pass it back over to you with another two-part question. What are the capabilities and features within 5G that DoD is looking at exploring both in the short term and in the long term? Great.
So many of the 5G features are just starting to become, they're just slowly coming online. It's difficult for us to find actually 5G devices that are available on the marketplace. But the 5G capabilities that we're really looking at is ultra low latency, massive machine type communication, and the wide spectrum enhanced mobile broadband capabilities that come with 5G. And some of those features also will eventually enable network slicing, allows for secure data plane layers. So within those capabilities, we're looking at exploring narrowband IoT type devices. This enables us to have a small form factor capability for whether it be for tracking devices, for sensors, leveraging that type of technology that we hope will become available in the next few years. Massive machine type communication will support our autonomous mobile robots, which we're really excited for, and then ultra low latency communications for our AR, VR. All those capabilities in the near term and the short term will enable not only our 5G smart warehouse, but all the other DoD 5G efforts that are going on at this time.
All right, thank you, Kevin. We're going to move on over to Dr. Danny Sava. And my question for you is, in the current challenges in 5G and the wireless across the country, what do you see as those current challenges?
So within my organization, one of the biggest challenges is skills overall. So we talk about 5G, the basis of that is understanding the OSI model, networking in general. We get a lot of people that come in as network engineers or network architects, and they think that they can do the wireless piece. It's easier to train those type of people, but they're not really prepared for it. They tinker with it at home, and they think that that same skill set transfers over, and that's just not what we're seeing. Right now, we're struggling to find talent overall because of the great resignation that's going on. We're seeing people leave the organizations. They're taking this institutional knowledge with them, and it's really a big impact and a driver for how we're trying to get to that mission success. We already have challenges with cybersecurity as a whole. Everybody wants to do cyber, but they're really not trained in that either. They have an IT background and then say, let me get into cyber. I've heard stories, let me do cyber because I'm going to get rich quick, which is not always the case. But cyber seems to be the direction that everybody wants to go to, and we have that need for it. There's hundreds of thousands of jobs that are available right now from a cyber perspective. I like some of the work that the DoD is doing with partnering with organizations like Microsoft for the SkillBridge program. AWS or Amazon is doing the same thing to try to train those folks as they're coming out of the military to give them a skill set that actually transfers over to what we need. Like always, software, hardware, there's that challenge. Software makes great strides, then the hardware has to play catch up, and now our expertise is doing the same thing where the folks are just not there. We need the DoD to work with us a little bit from a contracting perspective to make sure that the job recs that are going out, if we're talking about 5G, they can't have 10 years of experience in 5G right now. And that's really what I would need to be a little bit more successful with my mission.
Thank you, Dr. Sava. Yes, I'm the Deputy Director of Mission Operations for Jacobs, and I work on the missile warning contract. And what Dr. Sava is saying is hitting close to home, with legacy systems and finding new talent to make sure that they have what they need. Both the talent and the hardware is a very big challenge that we're facing right now. So thank you for that. All right, we're going to move on to Mr. CT. What are some of the real-world DoD use cases for 5G? Has 5G been used successfully? Where was it used successfully? And what worked and didn't work?
No, appreciate the question. I'm coming through clear on the mic. All right. So through the DoD tranche activities, we've seen a lot of success from a research and development standpoint. Like Kevin was mentioning with the smart warehouse activity here, local San Diego area. We've also been involved with a number of tranches for another smart warehouse activity over for the Marine Corps over in Georgia, for Albany. Those demos are going successfully. I think we did a demo yesterday actually in Denver with Dish Networks actually for a 5G ORAN compliant standalone test with some of our partners there. From a use case perspective, Kevin kind of outlined some of the initial use cases that we're doing from an exploratory standpoint with IoT, machine-to-machine communications. One of the huge paradigm shifts that we're going to see around 5G is the biggest consumer of 5G will not be us in the crowd with our mobile devices. It's going to be the machines communicating with themselves. It may be containers or micro data centers that are distributed in architecture that need to communicate to support activities such as autonomous vehicles and large sensor-based networks. So the other piece of this is also rapid distributed technology for quick deployment for mobile communications in the field. Obviously that comes with some nuances, but these are the type of things that we've seen some success with so far.
Thank you, CT. And I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie Hutch to give us a little bit insight as she works with the different government agencies that she works for. What do you see as the challenges?
Sure, yeah. So from a Pki perspective, we're a small business. We've decided to really focus in on smaller, more tactical teams and the execution and use of 5G at that level. So one example where we used 5G successfully up with Hanscom, collaboration with the Air Force and also with Army DevCom out of Natick, was we utilized our own CBRS Band 48 instance that we built in our Gemini lab. We were able to successfully transmit full motion video in color over our network and then collect data from sensors on our robotic dogs that we borrowed from our friends at Boston Dynamics. We transmitted that data over to the Android Team Awareness Kit, or the ATAC, and we had very, very low latency with that. It was near real time. So it was really, really successful. And we recognized that there were some factors that probably contributed to this success. We used indoor CBRS antennas, so it made it a lot stronger, easier to transmit. This was an unclassified test, so we didn't have additional security considerations there. And we were really close range because we were indoors in the lab. So the next round of testing, as far as that experiment goes, is to add different classification levels and analyze and look at the latency when we do that, and also try to extend further distances to see if we can keep that low latency outcome.
Thank you, Stephanie. And you brought up a great point, which brings us into our next question about that challenge of being indoors and being able to have the same bandwidth, et cetera. So I'm going to go over to Kevin, and I'm going to ask him, what are some of the challenges and design considerations that the DoD has to incorporate in 5G to be successful?
Great. So I think a lot of the challenges that we're experiencing is trying to understand what's the appropriate business model to fit the use case that we're looking at. So right now, the commercial carriers, they have developed the perfect business model as far as how they're deploying their technology. However, in the DoD, we're trying to determine what type of business model or how do we want to leverage 5G technology. And there's a couple different ways that we can approach this challenge. We can either go with leverage the publicly available 5G infrastructure, or we go over to a private business model and actually own the equipment ourselves. And there's a lot of design considerations that go in with that, whether it be cybersecurity, the actual physical security of that equipment, or how we're going to deploy that hardware. So those are some of the challenges that we're experiencing. And then also, the consideration of possibly having a hybrid model, either through eventually network slicing, where we can have a private slice within the 5G network, but we can control that, or leverage a MOCN type design model. So there's a lot of different use case scenarios for us. Spectrum is also another huge challenge. So right now, 5G, there's a ton of spectrum that's available for that 5G technology. However, most of that spectrum is actually licensed. So the DoD at this time, we're looking at, well, what frequencies do we have access to, whether it be CBRS or some other unlicensed spectrum, or how can we work alongside with some of the carriers to leverage that spectrum that they have so that we can use it in a DoD environment. And then we also have the challenge of supply chain and supply integrity. Of course, most of the hardware that we're looking at using comes from overseas, China, some other locations that are maybe not, or to some degree our adversaries, and we're looking at understanding how can we control the supply chain so that at the end of the day we can have an incredible prototype, a prototype that we can actually transition from these tranche phases into an actual DoD environment, into our legacy hardware systems.
You brought up another great point of requirements. I'm going to pass this over to CT. I'm going to ask you the same question, the challenges and design considerations. But with that being said, what are the DoD customers' requirements, and what are their desired outcomes when you're looking to help them with this technology?
No, great question. And kind of to Kevin's point, right, we're in an interesting place when you start to see the introduction with 5G of owning your own private network. That is something that we do not have policies for today, how you secure it. And then as we look at that in a multi-cloud architecture, right, we're moving towards a data-centric solution set. Can you deliver and distribute the correct data to the right people at the right time in a secure fashion and validate that they have access or a need to know for that? 5G, the biggest piece around this it's the first LTE communication-based system that is cloud native in its behavior. So as you start to look at that supply chain, yes, we have countries that are friendly to some degree, but largely most of the consumption has been done on a macro level, and that's being done by the providers based off of a business sense. So you do have to look at that supply chain for the data that you're using and how we set those policies in place. We've been working with NCCOE, NIST, a number of intelligence communities to help guide and shape what that looks like, how you handle the multi-factor authentication case, the same way that we've done that for other wireless communication systems.
Thank you, CT. And I have another question for you. This is more around the cybersecurity focus of it. With the vast amounts of data that are being moved when using 5G, what are some of the most important cybersecurity considerations and implications when employing 5G?
The biggest piece is kind of what I was alluding to there, the identity access management. You look at things and how the protocols work today, TLS, right, looking at your Pki infrastructure. Today that's cumbersome and complex, so you only have a few, highly skilled people maybe within the organization that understand it. So I'm looking at and been working with a number of partners on introducing protocols such as KMIP, right, to make that dynamic. And this leads into what you can do with AI and machine learning as well, right, tying into behavioral analytics, right. As you look at if CT is supposed to only work from 8 to 5 o'clock and he's supposed to access a certain amount of data or certain access for files, me coming in at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night should trigger some red flags. We can do that in some sense, but doing that for your private network and then the orchestration and management as to how do I coordinate these events between what I'm getting from my normal service providers, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, whoever, versus my private network. And then balancing that on whether or not I'm consuming that with AWS hosted data, my private data center data, something that needs to be hosted at the edge because it's high performance or near real time. All of those complexities are what I'm starting to see. That's where your risk vector starts to really expand. And all of those need to be taken into account cohesively, not as independent silos for dedicated teams that, as we've traditionally done in the past.
Thank you, CT. And when you were talking about that, I can just imagine all the findings you're going to find in your lab when you're doing your testing, getting the different clearance levels in there. That'll be interesting. Mm-hmm. So the next question I'm going to ask is for every single panelist. So we'll start with Ms. Hutch, and then we'll move down to Kevin. So you hear a lot of talk about the need for innovation, particularly rapid innovation in the DoD. And what role does this play in your individual organizations?
Yeah, so from a Pki perspective, I mentioned, we're a small business, we're an 8A, 2 years in business, so we have a lot of really smart people and a lot of great ideas, but we can't compete head-to-head with our large prime friends, like my friends at Jacobs here. We don't have the same infrastructure or resources. So what we decided to do strategically was make the investment and build the Gemini test lab. This came from a demand from our Air Force and Army customers. What it allows us to do is to create a truly vendor-neutral facility. Because we're aligned with the University of Massachusetts, we have access to academia and researchers. PhD and faculty can come in as well. So it's a really dynamic spot where we can work on not only solutions development, but requirements development for future acquisition needs. So as I mentioned, this lab facility creates the opportunity for us to serve as a true technology integrator. We can sort of create a plug-and-play environment where we can bring in different partners to rapidly respond to some of the challenges and infrastructure issues that our clients are facing. And really what we're trying to understand and get after is what is the solution, the desired solution and the endpoint? Is it achievable? Are there any best industry practices out there that we can bring together to collaborate? Who are they and how do we work with them? And then is it scalable? So if we build and develop a network architecture, is it scalable? Is it mobile? and how much will it cost? It's a big factor. Sorry. I mentioned the ATAC full motion video scenario. So in addition to opportunities like that, we're looking at integrating other technologies like a SATCOM terminal into our lab, as well as the ability to just access Wi-Fi with various encryption levels. So there's a lot of opportunities to really be innovative in a rapid sense because we are truly a small business and we're very collaborative. Another point I just want to make, for small businesses, we have to rely on partners and collaborate. So we work very closely, as I mentioned, with the University of Massachusetts and the Research Institute there. We also work with the Convergence Center out of Indiana and Purdue. And they're doing a lot of research, not only on 5G, but also 6G. So looking ahead, understanding that we're currently living in 5G and developing those use cases, but what's next? We need to be prepared to kind of grow into that next generation of technology. And then also the Hawaii Pacific Innovation Center in Honolulu, which is looking primarily with more austere environment scenarios, so deploying tactical teams in denied comms environments and across Indo-PACOM. So a lot of really dynamic research going on, but I think as a small business, we're able to tap into those resources and help be an integrator for that.
Thank you, Stephanie. We'll pass it over to Dr. Danny Sava.
All right, so most people say if you're not first, you're last. And in a lot of organizations, great. When I was at SOCOM, lives were dependent upon the new technology, being innovative, bringing new capability to the warfighter. But when you work for organizations like NORAD, where we're constantly doing 24/7, 365 operations, we're scanning networks for missile activity, air activity, et cetera, I can't really be as innovative. I have a customer that's risk adverse, so I have to be cautious of that and careful not to try to make too many changes that are going to impact the end user. From a technology perspective, I think that we really need to understand what 5G is, what it can do, the capabilities that it brings for our organization and how it fits into that construct, instead of just saying it's new, I want it because it's bright and shiny. What is it really getting after? What problems is it solving? And then also looking at the total cost of ownership, right? So software, hardware has a set cost, but we don't ever really think about how many people is it going to take to run it? What training do I need? What are the long-term effects of that? As technology keeps changing, it creates new problems for us because now I have to have folks that are trained and experts in that new technology that hasn't even been done yet. So I appreciate folks like Pki that's doing the testing in the labs and working with all of these industry partners because they're doing that work first. I would much rather take that and understand the lessons learned so I can implement it in my organization and make it a little bit better for my team.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Sava. We'll move over to CT.
So one of the biggest pieces that we've been trying to contribute to, obviously, is Dell. We have a global reach. At times, right, I feel like that may be a burden when I look at my email box, right? So we're contributing to the Open Linux Foundation. We're looking at ORAN. We're looking and working with a number of the different standard bodies directly, as well as participating and trying to listen and work hand in hand with the customers to figure out what's the mission need. I know I didn't include it in my bio, so I'm prior Navy as well, Navy IT. Got a couple deployments behind me. But as a part of that and understanding the mission set, one of those key things is how do I bring all those different technology disciplines that have been silos? How do I feed that, working with partners like Pki, working with some of the universities that are investigating this, working with the agencies themselves to help guide and shape that? What I've found is there's very few people that can talk from cloud to 5G to networking to cybersecurity to what does it mean for a mech, and then the acronyms and how they're often interchanged, but maybe not in the appropriate ways. So for us, we've started to stand up our OTEL lab in Austin, Texas, and our focus is on providing US-based solution sets for the DoD and looking at what we need from a mission and warfighter standpoint. And that's to speed and accelerate the service provider's capability to provide that secure supply chain in a US-based solution versus them trying to do it in their own labs, which is not going to be as rapid as we probably can do it.
Thank you, CT. And we're going to go over to Mr. Surell.
Hey, so yeah, that's a great question. So I've spent 10 years doing rapid prototyping, and since working with the Naval Information Warfare Center, if anyone asks, can you implement something rapidly, it's The program offices are usually the biggest challenge into bringing a new technology. There's a whole acquisition and integration framework that needs to be gone through for bringing new technology, and that's very challenging. So what's been, in my career, what's been really exciting doing rapid prototyping is we can usually take prototypes, deploy it out to an operator, and it's used in a very small, narrow use case scenario through certain through certain waivers. However, when we want to transition technology into an actual program office, that's very challenging. What's unique with the project that I'm working on, the 5G Smart Warehouse, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense is giving us funding to modernize a warehouse here in Coronado, where we can establish a green space to operate in a non-interference basis to try to enhance the warehouse operations for NAVSUP. So here in Coronado, there's a air squadron that the warehouse supports, currently operates with 50-year-old plus old technology that is not efficient and can certainly use some modernization. So by leveraging 5G, we're looking at implementing IoT sensors, autonomous mobile robots, and AR/VR to modernize the current warehouse operations. So we're looking at taking a 1970s type warehouse, modernizing it to modern day. And we're doing this by going through a crawl, walk, run type process where we have a green space within a warehouse that we eventually will plan to integrate into actual operations in the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you, Kevin. We're going to move on to another question for every single panelist. So we'll start with Stephanie, move on to Kevin. What I'm curious about is how are each of you addressing that growing need for rapidly adaptable mobile communications? And I realize this could be mobile communications more on the through the enterprise lens or through the tactical lens. So I'll go ahead and start with Stephanie.
Sure. So we're looking at the tactical side. We talked about that. One thing that we did actually last week was we responded to a cyber prompt that came out of SOCOM, and it was an interesting requirement. When you think about special forces, low SWAP is a very serious consideration. Often operators are burdened with a lot of equipment and weight, and so looking at the requirements out of SOCOM, they desired a low SWAP system, low probability detection, low probability intercept, providing high broadband with a transport range up to 3 miles that weighs less than 500 grams and also has SATCOM integration. So very, very specific set of requirements, but specific use cases. So as part of our solution, what we proposed was a polymorphic mesh network, which sounds really fancy, but it just means that we have a mobile CBRS solution that allows operators to move and the network in a mesh format to flex and move with them. With that, we're proposing integration with ground and air autonomous assets, so leveraging UAS above and robot dogs on the ground. For any small businesses in the audience, I would strongly recommend looking at the CIBR program or the STTR program, which is where you partner with a university. It's not a lot of money in the CIBR program in the grand scheme of defense contracting. Phase 1 is $150K. But from a small business perspective, that can really give you a good infusion of money to go through the process of a feasibility test in phase 1 and then move on to prototyping in phase 2 and eventual commercialization and sales in phase 3. It also helps you, as a small business, like I mentioned before, you can be kind of constrained with your resources and your business development and sales activities. So through the CIBR program, you have an opportunity to do customer discovery and really work to understand what are their unique challenges. And as you go through the process, you can help tailor and mature your technology to meet the needs of the customer. So it's much more collaborative than a traditional acquisition process where you're responding to a set of requirements that have already been defined.
Thank you very much. We'll move on over to Dr. Sava.
So because of our organization's risk adversity, we're trying to partner with as many folks as we can. We sit down with some of the engineers and architects and then these third-party organizations that can really just create what that success criteria looks like I don't have a money problem. I mean, it's not unlimited funds, but what I really have is a people problem. I could staff my contract at 100% or even 110%, still not have enough people to do some of those sales type of activities and the demos and all of those other driving forces. We have a laboratory, we have a test and development facility, but it's a secured location, so it causes problems for us to try to get anybody in there to do some of that commercial type of work unless they're cleared. We've been trying to utilize laboratories that are outside the organization so that anybody can come in, we can pick the best of the best and actually work through that through some NDAs. That's it.
Thank you, Danny. Move on to CT.
Yep, so I definitely want to approach this from both lenses, right? Looking at mobility from an enterprise, our traditional sense, and then the tactical. As we look at the mobility today, I even run a private CBRS node in my home. Yes, I'm that nerdy. Perks of the job, I guess you'd say to some degree. But as we look at that, that's going to become more and more profound, right? You will start to have your own private network augmenting your Wi-Fi or completely replacing it. And part of that is as you look at the high speeds that are advertised around 5G, that does not penetrate walls if you understand basic RF. It doesn't do it well. So how will you get your 5G bars in your home into this type of a building, right? I have to deploy something dedicated to it inside. As we start to look at this from a tactical standpoint, the rapid deployments, right, that's where the automation and orchestration piece around the benefits from cloud, but then you still have to keep in mind with those cybersecurity concerns to support our mission set as well. So as a part of that, for us, I know when everybody woke up this morning, they thought about 5G, you thought about Dell. In case that wasn't the case, what you'll see that Dell is really a technology integration point, working with a robust ecosystem to enable whatever use case or mission set that's needed. And that gives us the flexibility to kind of tailor whatever solution needs to be created as rapidly as possible.
Thank you, CT. Kevin?
All right, so what we're trying to do is get mobility, DoD mobility, to the point where it approaches what the average user can experience on their personal devices. So every morning before when you wake up, before you go to bed, someone's probably on their mobile device, whether it be checking their emails, reading the news, utilizing some sort of app, and the economy of scale for all those capabilities is just incredible. You have Google, Amazon, Yahoo. Those are, multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar companies, and we're trying to create a user experience for the operators that is somewhat near to that type of capability. So bringing applications, bringing capabilities to the warfighter, to the sailor, to the Marine, that feels similar to what they're used to, and try to reduce the learning curve on how to utilize the technology since they're already familiar with how to use that device and that capability. So when we look at the 5G smart warehouse, instead of trying to utilize either pen and paper, clunky scanners, or manually typing in information, well, now an operator can use a mobile device and scan equipment, and how they're using that mobile device is automatically integrated into a program of record system that can automate and can update the inventory. And so that's just one small use case for warehouse purposes, but that transcends the entire DoD environment, trying to get applications and mobility services that a warfighter that feels intuitive due to what they're already commonly used to, that they already have experience with. So those are the growing needs that we're experiencing, is trying to bring that capability that approaches industry.
Thank you, Kevin. We've all seen how global events and emerging technologies has changed how we live, how we do work. I'm curious as to, and this is questions for Dr. Sava, how will 5G change the workplace?
So there's been a lot of research that's already gone into this, how it's going to impact the global economy through 2035, talking $13 trillion in economic output, $22 million worth of new jobs, and the list goes on and on. There's a lot of numbers out there, but that's what we perceive it to be. Now, what reality looks like, we'll figure it out over the next few years. We're seeing a big change in the remote work. There's issues across the board with working remotely, as we probably all experienced during the pandemic. You all get invited to a Teams meeting, people got their video on, and then nothing works. It becomes static or pixelated, and the list goes on and on. So it was very frustrating for me to work from home with my team because we just couldn't get anything done. It was really a pain. With 5G, the reliability goes up. The bandwidth capability, audio video capability, et cetera. Now they're even talking about holographic 3D imaging, kind of like what you saw in Iron Man with Jarvis, where you can get up on the whiteboard and folks can actually see it. So that's the capability perspective. I'll dial into a Teams call on a phone, but I can't see anything. So PowerPoints are flying around, and I just don't have that access that's necessary. So I think 5G is going to bring a lot of those extra capabilities. I think that also organizations are going to change the way that they do business because they're not going to need a physical footprint, a brick and mortar type of capability. They're going to go back to working from home solely. Then they're going to take that money, they're going to invest it in IT across the board, which is going to drive even more capability, but then more problems, right? Then we still need the expertise, we still need the training, and all those other things that we've already talked about. The one thing that I do like is I think it's going to increase the talent pool. For me, living in Colorado Springs, I'm trying to get folks to move out there. A lot of times I'm trying to target people from like southern states, and they don't really like the snow. So they don't want to move. They want to stay where they are, and they want to do the remote work. And the pandemic kind of gave everyone a different taste of the lifestyle, right? So with 5G, I think it's going to increase the capability for us to take a look at the talent pool around the world, bring the best of the best in, even though we're still going to have some challenges with clearances and things like that. But ultimately, I think it's going to move in the right direction. I think what organizations need to do is take a look at the current workforce, because some of those jobs are either going to become obsolete or not quite as necessary, which means they're not going to need as many people, and then those folks got to find some new work. So, for military, we re-job classify ourselves all the time. We move around. You like to do new stuff. So for those that want to bounce around, especially in the cyber realm, I think there's going to be a lot of capability, machine learning, AI, robotics, all of that. Organizations really need to start investing in how they take their current workforce and turn them into, that what's next.
Thank you, Danny. Now, before we go to the audience for questions, is there any go-backs or any last statements from any panelists you'd like to share?
The one thing that we didn't cover was from the supply and demand perspective is the removal of equipment. So right now, from an IT perspective, we got computers, software, hardware. We remove the magnetic media and we take it over to the Dermo site, and then they process it for destruction. But as we move into 5G, how are we going to take street signs and street lights and all of that other large type of equipment? I already struggle trying to get a vehicle just to take it down the road to the Dermo site. So when I'm trying to remove things from physical buildings, high altitudes, et cetera, what do we really do with that, and what's that process going to look like? So that also is going to, kind of change the way that the workplace operates.
I had one comment on that too. So kind of the opposite of removing technology and equipment is the infusion and then the need, as we have more devices and more connectivity, for these rare earth elements and other resources that are necessary to build these critical components. And one project that Pki worked on was supporting the Convergence Center out of Purdue, doing an REE, rare earth element assessment, of how could we potentially bring that refinement and manufacturing back to the US. And the reality is that it is possible, but it's a very long-term solution. It's going to take at least 10 years because it's a really messy process. The refinement of any materials it's really dirty. And historically, we've outsourced that to other countries, and we've created a bottleneck in the supply chain, a critical point of failure, frankly. So it's not so much from the REE perspective of the sourcing and transportation of it. It's the refinement of it and the ability to put it into production and actually use it in all of these devices that we need. So I think that's an important thing that we keep in mind, that as we look at 5G and we try to have more connectivity, more sensors, more devices, more robots, there's going to be a demand for these critical resources. And we have to think about how we do that, how we build up that infrastructure, and how we create a larger access or a bigger supply chain to get those resources.
Yeah, if you haven't been down to the other end of this facility, Thor is here from Verizon, which is the Tactical Humanitarian Operations Response Vehicle. It's the one-of-a-kind vehicle built to provide public sector partners with full range of Verizon frontline technology. They're doing 5G out of that. They can roll in during a storm or a catastrophic event and just get through the debris, set that up so command and control can begin. It was really cool. Casey and I got to check that out yesterday, and recommend everybody going over there and talking to those folks.
So I'm going to make a shameless plug. Without a doubt, when I said that ecosystem partner, when you look inside of Thor, you'll see some Dell servers. So that's just keep that in mind.
It was a very impressive vehicle. Any last remarks, Kevin?
No, let's go over to the audience.
Excellent. So we do have 2 microphones in each of the walkways. So if you do have a question, please make your way to the microphone to ask the question. Are there any questions? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hey guys, Chuck White here from Fornetics. On the cybersecurity question, we were talking about ICAM. I think CT, you were talking about that. What are your guys' thoughts on building out that architecture so that you can have a few things? 1, scale. 2, the ability to address zero trust, particularly around users, slices, network, services, applications. And then 3, and to Kevin's point, keeping it useful. How does one get from A to B in regard to those type of requirements?
Let me take it?
Yeah, you can take it.
So I think one of the biggest pieces around that, as you look at that identity management, authentication for a 3GPP-based network is drastically different from what you're used to with your WLAN. So looking at your policy functions, and today the carriers do that's how they track your billing, right? When you're like, why is my data rates going slow? There's mechanisms for them to do that. As we look at that from a DoD standpoint, I have to be able to map that back to your multi-cloud, to your, like I said earlier with the data center. Having that reference architecture for your identity management suite that is scalable across a multitude of deployment models, both tactical as well as your fixed site for enterprise, that is going to become very, very critical. If we miss that opportunity, we're going to let our adversaries kind of take a leapfrog on us there. And not addressing it will not make the problem any better long term at all.
Yeah, and to along those lines, so with 5G, improved user authentication, so the mobile device is authenticated to the network and has access to the radio access network. But then, pursuing the zero trust architecture, it's a new concept as far as how do we allow for devices to gain access to the network or gain access to applications, especially when you're talking about cloud-based applications. So for us, a lot of what we're looking at is how can we leverage zero trust architecture type solutions? How does that fit into the Navy and DoD risk management framework to ensure that not only are we meeting DoD requirements, but also that it is useful and actually secure from an end user perspective as well as from an enterprise perspective.
And I would say, I think it's important to note from a security perspective, there's never one correct solution. It really depends on the use case, it depends on the requirements and things like that. So it's important from a DoD national security perspective and industry as well, that we need to keep an open mind that there are some solutions that may be applicable or not, depending on the use case.
Thank you. All right, our next question.
Sure, Bobby Perkins, Veteran Mission Solutions, 5G Senior Advisor. One question I actually have is around the converged environments. We look at release 15, 16, 17. We've seen that private 5G has been siloed, and now we look at public 5G as being that next, if you will, roaming capability with on-flight lines in the smart warehouse, et cetera. Just would like for the team to kind of speak to maybe the MOCN architecture a little bit and how that relates to data traversing as you're roaming from different parts of the, whether it's flight line management, or other parts of the network where you're actually seeing data traverse over between public networks and private networks from a mobilization standpoint.
So I guess I'll kick this off. So one of the prior projects that I worked on, rapid prototyping, we did deploy operationally over a MOCN network and supported operations. And the challenge there is gaining the approval through the DoD CIO. So typically there's an approved process as far as how data is transversing over the networks. DIS has traditionally always been the service provider for us. So I think it's important as we look at MOCN designs, ensuring that we review the cybersecurity requirements and also ensure that the DoD CIO and DISA has visibility of what we're doing so that we can actually integrate those solutions into the DoD environment, and so that we're not just siloed into standalone prototype solutions.
And I'll jump in and add on that. That's kind of the work from a policy aspect. It's a business and a policy issue more so than anything else. How we map that, and you start, everybody's heard of the network slicing, right? And today we have our MPLS circuits, and that's great. How do I scale that efficiently to where I'm now looking at a policy based on the user, the data, and the device? And all three of those things may change based off the geolocation. So we have working prototypes and worked with a number of partners like JMA Wireless, Microsoft, Druid, to be able to prove this theory out, but it's really our process procedures and our acquisition policies have to be updated to now accommodate for that, and that even segues way back into the conversation around the identity management associated with all of those factors, because they're dynamically changing. So you don't have time to have a maintenance window that night for somebody to make an adjustment because the admiral is leaving from the East Coast to go to the West Coast, and he needs to have the same experience. That has to be orchestrated.
I used to be an information assurance manager back in the day, and I didn't really do that good of a job because I refused to say no. I always try to work with the teams and figure out what the best solution was. How do we mitigate the risk down to an acceptable level and be able to actually use the technology as it was designed to do? I think that's the biggest piece right now. You know, we're never going to eradicate all the risks across the board. You know, great conference as I walk around and talk to folks, and they're like, look, I updated this 4 minutes ago, and here, you know, firmware is already being targeted, et cetera. You have to work with each of your different teams. You have to work with the DAA or DISA or whoever your accrediting body is to really figure out what to do to get that down to an acceptable level.
And I feel like I need to say something because these guys are really smart. So I just want to add that from an Air Force perspective, we're seeing a lot of that flight line deconfliction necessity because there's so many assets and so many different types of networks and radio frequencies being bounced around that some of these communication channels are critical. They cannot go down. So one thing that we're seeing is kind of a trade-off. Which bandwidth are we going to use? Are we going to go with more of a CBRS mid-range between that 3.5, 3.7 gigahertz range? We're going to lean forward into the millimeter range. So it really, you know, typical government answer, it depends. But to CT's point, like that ability to have network slicing and really understand exactly which assets are leveraging which piece of the RF spectrum is really important.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Does anyone have an additional question? Going once. Oh, all right. You're up. Thank you.
Somebody had to. No. Seriously, this is actually something, I'm going to do a kind of a shameless thing for some of the work I do with CT, and, you know, how are we going to address, I'm going to look at this from a particularly a PKI perspective, because it is part of that mutual TLS that CT was referring to. How do we address concerns between things like DoD PKI with its set policies and practices, and then the need for scale-out architecture that 5G requires, where you're actually might, you know, how do you, what are your thoughts on deconflicting that process?
You're his partner, so go ahead.
I appreciate that one, Chuck. So the biggest piece is going to be the education, all right, working with the correct authorities to come up with a concise ConOps that does support all the mission objectives for the different deployment models. I don't think there's a clean-cut answer for one organization, the mission set, depending on which agency I'm working with versus the other, just because of the regulatory aspects there. But I do think we will have to continuously educate each other and work together to break that paradigm down, or we'll be too late.
Yeah, so when we talk about the Pki infrastructure, that is certainly one of the things that we're looking at for our effort, where one of the vendors has offered a bridge type solution where not only can you continue to use your DoD PKIs, but how can we potentially use those PKIs and bridge across different use case scenarios. So, part of the rapid innovation effort that we're all taking a part of is understanding what technology exists, how can we leverage it, how can we expand or work within policy, or maybe even change policy so that we can get greater capabilities, greater performance. And so that's what's really exciting, is not only is there a lot of 5G improvements that are available, but also the fact that innovation is really being spurned and explored. So I don't know. I hope that answered your question, but all right.
Well, that is time for everybody. I will pass it off to Ms. Tina. Thank you.
Let's just give this group a round of applause, huh? That was a great panel. Casey, thank you for moderating it. Alicia, thank you for putting it together. And to our panelists, thank you for sharing your expertise and your experience with us and just your perspective. Certainly appreciate it. And we recruit them because of their individual expertise, but it's always fun to see how they interact and feed off each other. So that was really, really well done. Thank you all for being here and participating in this today. And lastly, I want to thank Allison Barlow from the FCA staff for all the work she does behind the scenes to make these possible. So with that, we're going to conclude the Emerging Leader panel, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day at West and have a great day tomorrow. Thank you very much.